This is the new direct draw shake machine, a sophisticated machine that will produce a consistent quality shake in 4 different flavors in just about 5 seconds. But it's important for you to understand right at the beginning that the direct draw machine will not compensate or correct itself for any errors during the setup or filling operations. That's why the information in this tape is so important. We'll be dealing here with 3 operations. First, proper assembly of the parts, including sanitizing the machine. Priming, how to start the freezer operation for a proper shake. And finally, calibration, how to adjust the syrup flow for proper shake flavor. When you arrive in the morning, the direct draw machine will look like this, having been taken apart and cleaned the night before. All of the parts should be on the parts tray, ready for you to begin assembly. Your first step is to open the side access door. And turn on the mix reservoir refrigeration system by placing this switch in the right or left position. Also, check to see that the 2 main power switches are turned on at this time. And then install the drip tray. Next, you'll want this part, the drive shaft. You'll need to slide the O-ring into position. Lubricate the shaft and the O-ring to within 1 inch of the hex end. But do not lubricate the hex end itself. Next, insert the drive shaft through the rear shell bearing at the back of the freezing chamber and engage the hex end firmly into the gearbox coupling. Now the beater assembly goes in. First, check the scraper blades for nicks, dents, or signs of wear. Now, place the rear scraper blade onto the beater so the blade is firmly seated on both pins. When the rear of the assembly is in, rotate it and place the front scraper blade onto the beater. Push the beater assembly all the way in and engage the beater onto the drive shaft. Now comes the torque rotor shaft. Put the 2 O-rings on the front of the shaft and lubricate them. Then, place the rear torque bearing on the end of the shaft. The complete assembly goes in with the bearing sliding into the bearing housing in the center of the drive shaft. Next, pick up the freezer door and install the door gasket and the sleeve bearing. Position the sleeve bearing so the flange edge is against the door. Just to warn you, don't lubricate either of these parts. Now you can position the door so the torque rotor shaft and the 4 door bolts are in position. And secure the door by tightening the door fasteners in a crisscross fashion. Make sure you don't over-tighten the door fasteners. This is the draw valve core. Inspect each of the 3 O-rings carefully for nicks and cuts. If any of them are damaged, they must be replaced. After inspecting the O-rings, put them on the draw valve core. Then lubricate the O-rings. Install the valve core into the door assembly with the handle slot toward you. And push it up from the bottom until you can see the handle slot at the top. Do the same thing with the other valve core for this chamber. Next, Put the color-coded outer draw valve handle into position in the valve core slot and insert the locking pin. Then put the other handle into place and push the pin the rest of the way through. Lubricate each of these spindles from the plastic mix blade up to about an inch from the top. Then slip the spindle through the draw valve core until the rod reaches the spindle coupling above. Pull up on the coupling sleeve, push the rod in, and rotate the rod until the slot in the end of the spindle rod fits over the pin in the coupler. Release the sleeve to lock the rod into position. Pull down on the rod to make certain it's locked. Then install the other spindle for this chamber the same way. Now put on the dispensing nozzle caps and push in the torque rotor shaft as far as it will go. Finally, repeat all of the steps you've just gone through for the other freezing chamber. Now you're ready for the mix reservoir. Put the reservoir with its cover into the refrigerated cabinet. And connect the mix pressure lines to the fittings above the mix reservoir. The assembly of the air mix pump is very important. You'll want to be certain that you know every step. Before assembling the pump, check all O-rings and rubber check bands for damage. After inspecting, put the O-ring and rubber check band on the piston. The rubber check bands go on rough side out. Remember to lubricate only the O-rings. Then install the air orifice. Be sure to keep your fingers away from the top to prevent clogging the orifice. After lubricating the inside of the pump housing, slip the piston into the bottom of the pump and push it all the way in. Be sure that you can see the ball crank port through the large hole in the air pump housing. Now place the O-rings and check bands onto the pressure head. Remember, rough side out for the check bands. Again, lubricate only the O-rings. Next, put the pressure head into the bottom of the pump. Now, pick up the mix suction hose assembly. Put the O-ring in place and lubricate it. Then, snap the pressure relief spring into place. Place the mix suction hose onto the end and insert the complete assembly into the pressure head, securing the hose and the pressure head with a keeper pin. Now the air mix pump is ready to be installed. Before installing the pump, see that the pump ball crank is in the top position. If it isn't, just turn it by hand until it is. Now you can connect the mix pressure line to the pressure fitting on the pump. Next, place the collar over the pump housing and locate the housing over the ball crank and the positioning pin. Next, insert the locking pin. Repeat the same steps for the other pump, and the installation of the pump assemblies will be finished. After you've installed the second pump, put the mix level indicating rods down into the reservoir. Plug the connector into its three-pronged socket above, and place the bucket support into its fitting. Now we need to sanitize the shake machine. Mix 1 packet of McDonald's sanitizer detergent with 2 1/2 gallons of warm water, not hot water, in a clean, sanitized bucket. Hang the bucket from the bucket support. And place the 2 mix suction hoses into the solution. Check to see that the torque rotor shaft is pushed all the way in. Then place an empty bucket under the draw valves and press the wash button. When the sanitizing solution starts to flow out of the torque rotor shaft bleed port, pull both draw valve handles forward and let them remain open until the pumping stops and the chamber is empty of solution. After you've mixed 2 1/2 more gallons of McDonald's sanitizer detergent solution, hang the bucket from the bucket support and repeat the process for the other freezing chamber. After you've sanitized the second freezing chamber, put the hoses into the reservoir. You can use the reservoir funnel to fill the reservoir with shake mix to approximately 3 inches from the top. Now it's time to prime the freezing chambers with mix. First, you need to place an empty bucket under the draw valves and open both valves. Make sure that the torque rotor shaft is still pushed in. Next, press the prime button and hold it in until the sanitizing solution is flushed from the freezing chamber and mix starts to flow from the nozzles. When mix flows from the nozzles, close both draw valves, but continue to hold the prime button in. When shake mix starts to flow from the torque rotor shaft bleed port, release the prime button. Then, after the mix has stopped flowing, pull out the torque rotor shaft. Now, flush the freezer door with a cup of water to remove any mix residue from the torque rotor shaft area. Then insert one end of the torque rod into the torque arm above. Lift up the rod until the bottom will clear the torque rod shaft and set the bottom end of the rod into the shaft. Repeat the priming process for the other freezing chamber. Finally, after both freezing chambers have been primed, push the rocker switches on the panel above the freezing chamber to the auto position. You start the freezing cycle by slightly lifting one of the actuating arms from each freezing chamber. Allow the machine to complete the initial freezing cycle, and then check for leaks around the freezer door. Retighten the door fasteners if necessary. Put the drip tray into its spot under the draw valves. Now, for calibration. Calibration means adjusting the syrup flow for a proper shake every time. It should be done daily. Here's what you'll need: a stopwatch, a calibrating cup, and a special calibrating valve. Before you begin, check the syrup tanks in the back of the machine to be sure they're adequately filled and not overfilled above the line. Now, at the front of the machine, install the syrup calibrating valve at the machine's syrup line connection. Place the calibrating cup under the valve. Then, depress the valve button and start the stopwatch at the same time. When the stopwatch hand reaches 5 seconds, release the calibrating valve button. If the amount of syrup drawn in 5 seconds was 1 ounce, the syrup is properly calibrated. Remember, proper calibration requires 1 ounce of syrup for every flavor. If the amount of syrup drawn was less than 1 ounce, you'll need to increase the syrup pressure. If you drew more than 1 ounce, you'll need to decrease the pressure. The pressure regulators for this are located above the syrup tanks in the back of the machine. To adjust the regulators, pull out on the red locking ring and turn the adjusting knob clockwise to increase and counterclockwise to decrease the syrup pressure. Recheck your calibration until exactly 1 ounce of syrup is drawn in 5 seconds. Repeat the calibrating procedures for the other flavors. When you've finished calibrating all the syrups, connect the syrup lines to the freezer door. Push the syrup line fittings into the syrup ports. And secure them with the locking pins. Remember, connect the syrup lines to the freezer door before you connect them to the machine. The syrup is under pressure, and connecting the syrup lines to the machine fittings first will cause a real mess. Next, connect each syrup line to the machine by pulling back on the sleeve of the quick disconnect coupler. Secure the line over the male fitting and release the coupler sleeve. If you're serving only 3 flavors, be sure to lock the draw valve for the 4th flavor. Use a syrup line locking pin and insert it into this fitting just below the 4th flavor valve handle. This will prevent anyone from opening this draw valve during operation. To prime the syrup lines, draw out approximately half of 1 shake from each nozzle and discard it. Now place the front cover on the machine. Lower the cover over the draw valve handles. Pull out at the bottom and insert the top of the cover. Push in the bottom of the cover and drop it in place on the holding pins. Now, the direct draw shake machine is ready for operation. Another videotape program will instruct you on operating the direct draw machine. Refer to that program next.